Everyone, I hope all of you are doing well. The host location or the where the podcast is currently located around the globe has changed. So I recently just came to New Zealand, and so I'm in New Zealand right now, and I will be for about the next 2 years. And the host country of the podcast has changed now. And in this episode, I got a chance to have a conversation with a former Joint Task Force 2 soldier. My next guest here is Mr. Randy Turner, who had served in Canada's elite Special Forces unit known as the JTF2. The JTF2 are probably the most underrated Special Forces unit in the world, as they are known to have engaged in some of the most complex military operations around the world. The JTF2 train in a variety of environments, from maritime environments to extremely cold environments in the far north of in Canada. And as Canada has all of the perfect environments to train its special forces units, it enables the JTF2 to produce even more capable and lethal soldiers. We spoke for about an hour. We spoke about how he got selected for JTF2, some of some of the experiences he had while serving in the unit, how he became a part of the unit. He has a very interesting story to tell about that, and how he founded his own company called Direct Action Combat. And Randy hosts his own podcast, and he also has his own YouTube channel where he provides insights from his career in the Special Forces, and he provides training to civilians and law enforcement personnel. I hope all of you enjoy the next 1 hour of this podcast. As always, please do like, subscribe, and share this channel with others. Thank you. Recording started. Yeah, thank you so much, Mr. Turner, for coming on my podcast. So, Randy here is a former JTF2 soldier, and he currently owns his own company called Direct Action. So, Randy served for over 16 years in the JTF2, and he was deployed all across the world as a part of JTF2's operations. Randy has transitioned his exceptional skills into the civilian world. He is now a highly sought after tactical trainer, leveraging his combat experience and knowledge to lead direct action. And through this company, Randy empowers individuals from various backgrounds: military, law enforcement, security professionals, and even civilians. And Randy's expertise extends from traditional firearms training and even uh, tactical training. And he has incorporated his background in mixed martial arts, which he competed in professionally for over a decade alongside his military service. And his experience as a JTF2 soldier and his dedication to passing on his knowledge through direct action combat solidifies his reputation as a respected leader and a valuable asset to the security community. So yeah, thank you so much, Randy, for coming on my podcast, and we can begin now.
All right. Thank you very much, sir, for having me. And yeah, looking forward to chatting with you.
So I just kind of like to know the background of every guest who like comes on the show, and so I got to know you. I said this before we started recording, but I got to know you through your own podcast, and I think you were on an airplane just after 9/11 happened, and then
Yep.
I think somewhere along that line, then you kind of, I think, decided to join the army. So could you just maybe walk us through that story? if
Sure.
that's okay.
Yeah, no problem. Yeah, I joined the Canadian Armed Forces when I was 18 years old. So I just graduated high school. I was living in the East Coast of Canada at that time. And I turned 19 years old during basic training. So once I took off from where I grew up in Halifax, I joined the army and became part of a regiment called the Princess Patricia's Canadian Light Infantry. And my first posting was in Winnipeg, Manitoba. So I was part of the
Mhm.
2nd Battalion PPCLI. And while part of the PPCLI, we were doing some parachute training, and it was
Yeah.
working towards a civilian license, so a civilian parachute license. And I think we were maybe 4 or 5 jumps into this program. And literally on the day that 9/11 happened, I was standing in the door waiting for the green light. The green light had come. I had just about launched myself out of the door. And at that point, we had basically the flight engineer and the pilots yelling at us to sit down and put our seatbelts on. We had to ground the aircraft. And it was a beautiful sunny day. Didn't make sense for us. We had already jumped a couple times that day, but it was early in the morning. And long story short, we grounded the aircraft, not really knowing why. And even the pilots weren't sure why. They were just told by Transport Canada to ground all aircraft. And then it was not long after, maybe 15, 20 minutes, there was a TV that was set up in the hangar. And as you can imagine, it was all over, mainstream news. And we realized and learned very quickly that the Twin Towers had been attacked. So, being part of the Canadian Armed Forces at that time, we had received phone calls from our chain of command saying, we don't know exactly what's going on, but it's probably best in everyone's best interest that we collaborate, get back to base, and we'll figure out what's going on from there. So off we went. Where we were jumping is a place called Steinbach, Manitoba, which is not too far outside of Winnipeg. So we jump back in the vehicles, head back to Winnipeg, and report to our chain of command. At that point, there was still not a lot of information. A little bit of questions, as you can imagine, some guesses to what this was, and what there was a reason for it. A lot of chatter, as you can imagine. There was a huge buzz, and so once we got back to Winnipeg and then the dust had kind of settled, and obviously there's a lot of folks that are upset, asking lots of questions, trying to figure out what's going on. And then weeks went by. Turned into a couple of months, and then were given a heads up that we were most likely going to deploy to Afghanistan in early 2002. Myself, amongst others, we were kind of skeptical, kind of questioning whether or not Canada was going to get involved with this, and not for any other reason than it's just up until that point, the only time Canada was really fighting in any type of war was Korea. So it was quite some time that, for many years, Canada was fulfilling a peacekeeping role. And then very quickly, like a light switch, we had an organization within the 2nd Battalion stood up, and we deployed early in 2002 to Afghanistan, where we spent almost 5 months for that very first tour.
Mhm. Okay. And like, how did the transition to like JTF2 happen? Like after you finished your initial rounds in the infantry.
Yep, it's a great question. So I originally tried out for, I had attempted. So my first year that I applied to try out for JTF2 was right before that Afghanistan incident. So it was early in the summer fall of 2001, leading into 2002. So I just came home from Bosnia. I did a tour in Bosnia in 2000, 2001. Came home, put the paperwork together for an application process to try out for Joint Task Force 2 to become an assaulter with that organization. The first year that I applied, I put my paperwork forward, and not to cast shade on my section commander at that time, but the paperwork never got processed. So when the deadline had come and gone for that particular year or that specific year, my paperwork didn't get forwarded, so I missed an opportunity. You know, Fast forward year two now, Afghanistan had happened. I came home from Afghanistan, put the paperwork together again. This time I stayed on top of it, and leading up to a couple of final interviews to try out for JTF2, It was about 2 or 3 weeks prior to when I would be expected to go try, which was the fall at that time. And I had broke my wrist. So I broke my wrist, and 2 weeks before I was about to take off for selection, had to pull my application based on recommendations in terms of healing and being 100% going into selection. So that was year two. Fast forward year three now. Afghanistan is now in the in full blown operational rotations. So the Canadian Armed Forces are involved heavily. Conventional forces are involved. JTF2 is involved, and now I'm doing selection for JTF2 application potential. So that year was 2003. Everything went well. I was able to successfully complete JTF2 selection, and then I got picked up for the assaulter course, which started in January of 2004. So I was on course for almost 9 months at that time, and then became part of JTF2, and then went into basically an operational cycle of deployments in Afghanistan.
And I mean, one question I was just kind of like looming on my mind is like, if you look at, the United States and Britain, there are several different special operations forces. Like in the United States, you have the SEALs, you have the Delta Force, you have the 75th, you name it. But I mean, I'm not sure, but is JTF2 like kind of a combination of like, let's say if you were to like create the equivalent, Canadian equivalent of all those forces, is in Canada, are there any other special operations forces other than JTF2, or is it like JTF2 like a combination of, let's say, all those functions or special operations forces together?
No, that's a legitimate question. It's a question I get asked a lot. And in Canada, and the numbers in relation or in comparison to the states, it's a little bit different, but the layout is very similar. So within Canada, we have the Canadian Special Operations Forces, which is a command of elements, and in those elements there would be a variety of different units. So JTF2 being one of them in comparison to Delta or SEALs would be JTF2. And then we have another organization in the under the umbrella, which is called CSOR, so the Canadian Special Operations Regiment, which would be in comparison to the 75th or Rangers or Green Berets. And then we have what's another organization called CJIRU, so the Canadian Joint Incident Response Unit. And that organization is they were originally stood up and mandated for domestic response to anything that was nuclear, biological, chemical. But over the years and through their maturity, their mandates have changed, and now they're involved a little bit more out of area and deployed settings. So those are essentially the three units. There is a fourth unit, which is SOA, so the Special Operations Aviation section. That organization is responsible for fixed wing and rotary lift, so transporting soldiers from point A to point B in a battlefield or an operational deployment. So that's essentially the four organizations that fall under the umbrella of Canadian Special Operations Forces Command, which is a mouthful, but there's JTF2, CSOR, and CJIRU primarily.
Mhm. Okay. Okay. Um, and so you kind of like mentioned, like it took you 3 years nearly to get into JTF2. But once you like commenced the selection process, like were you able to complete it in one attempt, or did that also take like a couple of attempts at it?
Yeah, so I got pretty fortunate. I was able to successfully complete it the first attempt, and successfully complete the it's almost a full year of training for the actual assaulter course. So I got fortunate. First attempt through selection, first attempt through the assaulter course. That isn't common. Well, I shouldn't say it's not common. It is common, but what else is very common is it's not something that should be shrugged at. Is it takes some people multiple attempts, either two attempts at selection or two attempts at selection and the assaulter course. And that isn't like in terms of who's better or one soldier versus the other soldier. Just certain things happen and transpire during selection, where maybe an injury happened, or somebody that tries out for the organization is maybe not demonstrating some of the attributes, whether that's maturity or the ability to work autonomously, whatever that might be, might not have been demonstrated. Therefore, the organization says, we see potential in you, but we're going to suggest that you come back and try again, maybe in a year's time. So it's not uncommon that for a lot of assaulters, they've had to do two selections or two selections plus two special operations assaulter courses.
Okay. And I mean, there is no secret that the selection process and the training process is it is quite rigorous. So like I just have two questions about that. So like how like if like again, I'm sure much of it is classified in nature, but like if you can talk about it like in a generic sense, like could you walk us through the selection and the training process and like based on your experiences, like what surprised you the most about selection and training for JTF2?
So in training and preparation at that time, there wasn't a lot of information to go off. So all I really knew was it was going to be difficult. I knew it was going to be physically demanding. I knew it was going to be, cognitively challenging. I knew that. That's all I really knew. So I didn't have a lot of information at that time what to expect. Once selection kicked off, it's there's no secret. It's 7 days of and it's a grind. Challenging mentally, physically, emotionally, cognitively, as you can imagine. All of those things will get tapped into. And to your point, I'm not going to disclose specific details, but what I would say is, given the fact that it's a tier one organization, it's the kind of the source of last resort. You can imagine what they're looking for in terms of attributes, and the individual that endeavors to succeed in selection. You can expect that there's going to be phobia testing. So is the individual comfortable, and can they function well in a water environment? Can they function well in a confined space or enclosed space environment? Can they function well at elevation? So, a height phobia. These things are tested, and there's a variety of ways to test these things and see how an individual performs and is able to complete tasks or not. And every year that selection runs, there are modifications made. There are evolutions that are polished or integrated or based on, operational realities. Some things may be deducted or added to ensure that they're selecting the right person for the job. One thing that I will say about the JTF2 selection process, the guys that run it and, the folks that are behind selecting the individuals, they are very professional. They do an extremely good job at as best as I can in a 7 day period, which is not a long time, but in 7 days, when the days are long, you get to see true colors, and the staff do a really good job at maintaining a level of professionalism that is adequate to select the right person. And they also do a good job of, sifting through guys that are just not ready yet or do not have the attributes that they're looking for. So it's extremely well done. And that's just the 7 days to get selected. So an individual may finish 7 days, may have, succeeded in terms of getting to the finish line on selection, but maybe didn't quite demonstrate the full potential or the full complement of attributes, or maybe underperformed generally. So they may not get selected. So you could finish, but not necessarily get selected. And that's not a slight on the individual. That doesn't mean that they're not value added. That doesn't mean that they're not a good soldier. That just means they need another attempt to try it again. So that's the selection phase in a nutshell. Once the individual is selected and they're embedded onto the operational readiness course. So this course, that's a year long now. At the end of it, the idea is the assaulter that graduates is operationally ready to be effective. So he can embed onto the teams, and he can deploy in short order, and he can do his job as efficiently as would be expected at the end of that year. So the way that the guys are prepared now in training is very different. And to be completely honest, it just gets better and better every year. The standards do not change. The standard is still the standard. So it's difficult, it's challenging, and it's meant to be. And I don't know what the percentage is exactly. I don't know what the number is, but I would say of everyone that submits a notice of intent to try out, from the beginning, that's your initial paperwork submission that says you're interested in becoming an assaulter, to the guys that actually graduate, it's about 1%. Right. So
Okay.
it's a tough grind, and it's not easy. And there are a lot of really good soldiers who I have the great opportunity to work with in the past who have attempted selection and were unsuccessful. That doesn't make them a bad soldier. It just means there's certain things that that community is looking for that the individual may or may not have enough of.
Mhm. Okay. And in my opinion, I do think Canada has like a lot of great places to train. So you have both of the coasts, you have mountains, and you have like the cold, arid environments up north. So like, how much has like the unit incorporated these geographical advantages like for training and stuff like that? Like,
Yeah, it happens. It's a pretty consistent, I would say, consistent evaluation or a reevaluation of current situations that are going on in the world, but also, skill sets that the guys need to maintain on a regular basis are, as you can imagine, they're very broad, right? There's a lot of things that the guys need to stay sharp on. So when you think about all of the skills that need to be sharpened, there are certain things that may take higher priority based on current events, based on projections of where that operational readiness may be required. And also, there's areas that maybe haven't been touched in a while that will be revisited. So the guys do a really good job of keeping everyone honest and revisiting some of those skills that maybe need a little bit of polish, maybe need to be revisited once in a while.
mhm. Okay. Um, so like I've had the chance to talk to I think like four SOF members so far, and like one thing I've just kind of noticed is that everyone has their own, let's say, specialization. So this morning from Australia, I had a sniper. I think the SEAL also had his own specialization. In the 75th, he also had his own specialization, and in the podcast you conducted with Arjun Grewal, he was, I think, an interpreter. What sort of specialization did you have in JTF2?
Sure. So I spent the majority of my 16 years in that organization. I spent the majority of my career as a diver. So everything that had to do with maritime special operations. So on surface, subsurface, that's where I really invested and divulged a lot of information. I absorbed a lot of information, a lot of skill tradecraft, excuse me, on the water. So that was my specialty. In conjunction with that, I was also a climber for a short amount of time. So everything that had to do with a complex terrain setting, setting anchors, rope lines, stuff of that nature that could be deemed as complex in an environment that is sketchy for a group of guys to navigate through, whether they're wearing 60 pounds of gear or 80 pounds of gear, et cetera. So those would be my two specialties per se. And I spent a lot of time underwater, and I'll be honest with you, like that was my specialty. I absolutely loved everything about it. It was a challenge for sure. And even during training, there is a lot of risk that is assumed with safety and just the application of training. Which what I liked about it was, sometimes we'll do certain things, and if things don't go according to plan during training, it's more relatively simple to say, okay, let's reset. That was a disaster. Let's try it again. With maritime special operations, I found the margins for error were a lot less because the severity of the real situation while training was as real as it gets. So oftentimes, even during training, like you're climbing outboard of a vessel that is underway, and that's a 30-foot climb, for example, while wearing potentially 50 or 60 pounds of gear. All it would take would be, a lapse of concentration or focus, and if that assaulter, misses a rung of a ladder while scaling the side of a ship, that could be the difference between him not successfully climbing on top of the vessel to do his job. That's just a method to get to do the job. not to mention the complexities of actually assaulting a vessel, which is massive. Um, but the reality is, things like that during training, it's very difficult to say, oh, well, we'll just do that one over again. If somebody falls into the water or falls into the vessel, there's some serious ramifications in terms of personal safety and elements of personal injury that are real. So that's what I really liked about the special operations, maritime specific stuff. I found it even during training, it was as real as it gets. It's very complex. It's very complicated. I would say of all of the options of everything that we are expected to be proficient at in terms of what's mandated, maritime special operation, in my opinion, and it's just my opinion, is the most complex. It's the most complicated piece of everything that we do.
Okay. How much time do you have? Another 30 minutes or?
Yeah, I got about another 30 minutes.
Okay. Okay. Um, and so like one question I just had was like, so you just said like maritime operations are like the most complex of all. But it's like I'm sure like you guys spend a lot of time like planning missions and just kind of working out everything you might encounter. But like, how does like the ground reality differ from, what you might uh, encounter, like let's say in the training center versus when you actually go out on a mission? Like, what sort of differences did you see in the two?
That's a really good question. I would say in training scenarios that are designed to challenge the assaulter, some cases they're very challenging for sure. In some cases, and it depends on who's running it and who's setting that up to challenge the assaulters. I would say in some cases, those scenarios are presented to ensure that the assaulters win, which I had a problem with it, and I still do. I think it's okay during training for assaulters to fail and try to implement a tactic or a specific technique that just doesn't work. And then that way it keeps everybody honest in terms of, do we need to reevaluate or do we need to realign a specific tactic or a technique that we're trying to implement. So what differs from training to reality is, in reality, when we're executing a specific job, what the bad guy does or says or reacts, we have no control over. In a training scenario, we can, in some cases, give clear direction to role players so they act a certain way, they say a certain thing, they behave a certain way. What's different in training versus reality is, in reality, when, for example, if we're doing an interior combat scenario, we kick a door in to assault a compound or a structure. Once we kick that door in, what happens on the inside, we're on reactive mode. We are reacting to what is thrown at us. And, the bad guys have a say in the situation. Sometimes what we think they're going to do versus what they actually do is very, very different. So I would say what's really unique and interesting about the selection process, it really does define or determine whether or not that individual has the ability to make very quick decisions that are adequate for the appropriate situation that they're presented with. So collection does a really good job. The assaulter course does a really good job highlighting those things where, if there are trends within the assaulter, the individual, he's just not quite making the right decision consistently enough, that could be a red flag where, the unfortunate reality is the train moves at a specific pace and tempo with certain standards that need to be met. If the individual just needs a little bit more time or is not quite grasping the material or not quite making a wise decision consistently, that unfortunately can find that individual could find himself on the way out for either maybe another attempt or maybe not. So that's, to me, the biggest difference between training and the reality. What's cool about it,
Okay.
though, is, I guess, the caveat or the addition that I would add to that is, there's been times that I've done things on the job operationally, and afterwards it kind of sinks in slowly, and I look back and reflect and realize, like, holy, I didn't realize I did that. What was the cause for me to react that way? And I do think there's a reliance or a default setting that came to training. So in other words, like, man, I can't believe I did that thing. Well, it's because I've trained it and repped it out so much that almost subconsciously my body just moved a certain way, or I made a decision a very specific way. And I do think some of that is on the individual, and some of that is on the quality of training that one receives.
One question I just had, like I've asked this to some of the other guests as well, is so like the world of warfare is changing by the minute, you know, it's not like in other professions, like, you know, you train and then it's very likely that whatever you go and do on the job, it's not going to really change that much. But for special operators, you know, like maybe with specifically to JTF2, how does it train its operators to like make sure that they are up to date with whatever's going on
Yeah.
in the world of warfare? So,
That's a great question. You're right. The landscape of um, operational realities has changed, and it's continuously changing. Um, for an example, like 15, 20 years ago during the Afghan days, for example, the method of execution is quite different than what's going on today. So it's important that we revisit the stuff that's happened in the past, because obviously those experiences are worthwhile bringing to the forefront of what we're dealing with today. But you're absolutely right. So for an example, like modern warfare and the use of drones and technology has it's through the roof. It's more applicable today than it was even 5 years ago. What's interesting about the dudes at JTF2, they're very intelligent, they're very smart, they're proactive, and they're always looking to improve capabilities, enhance capabilities, or create new capabilities. And I can tell you this, like, I left in 2019. There were guys at the unit that were working on the specific, drone program. I'm not going to go into the details, but the use of drones and the application of drones, that was happening a decade ago at the organization before it became a thing. And now it's very much, a strong, relied upon piece of technology for modern warfare. So that's what I mean by the guys are very forward thinking. They're intelligent. They see trends based on different areas of the globe, and based on those trends, they're thinking about ways to tackle these problems far far faster than direction given by government, for an example.
okay. So leaving JTF2, or just the Army in general, but leaving JTF2, it must have been a big adjustment for sure. You know, like so how was that transition? You know, like suddenly going from being the special operator to, you know, like being a civilian again.
Yeah, that's a really good question. Like, it was a challenge for sure. For so many years, donning the uniform and being around such a high quality group of dudes was tough to walk away from. And walking into the, I'll say not completely unknown, but unknown, in some capacity, where starting a business on my own, where yes, I had some guys that would help me out from time to time. I had some great mentors give me some good advice along the way. But for the most part, that was all on me, and it was by choice for me to leave while I was healthy, I was happy, on positive terms. So I decided to leave while I still have lots of legs left in me to do something different for the next 20 years foreseeably. But the transition was difficult because, unbeknownst to anybody that didn't really see it coming, I retired late 2019, early 2020, hit the ground running. I executed a contract with my former unit, which was awesome. So they hired me to provide some training in January of 2020. And then shortly thereafter, our federal policing organization called the RCMP, so the Royal Canadian Mounted Police, they hired me for a contract. So I thought, oh, this is going to be really good. It was a great transition at the beginning, and then March 2020, COVID happened. So I was literally just getting the business started, and then everybody, fell victim to the nonsense that was being pushed down our throat, and nobody was training. So, law enforcement agencies didn't really know who I was or what I was offering. Military guys only knew based on, my reputation or what guys spoke of me, but they still were not hiring outside contractors to provide training. So almost 2 years that went on where, trying to make a name for myself, trying to get the brand and the business, up and running. So it was a challenge for sure. Um, and the other thing too that was challenging. So I retired from the military in 2019. I retired from fighting in 2018, so the year prior. Now, the two things that, I was extremely passionate about, I walked away from. And sometimes people say, well, that's your choice. Why did you do it? I did it because, from the MMA perspective, luckily I didn't sustain too much damage while in the cage. But for folks that train MMA, the grind is in the training. That's where the body takes a bit of a shit kicking. So my body was, feeling it, but I knew it was wise to walk away while I could still remember where I left my keys, so to speak. And then a year later, I retired from the Canadian Armed Forces because I felt boxed up at the unit. I felt like I had so much potential to share with other people, but I just felt like I was limited to the institution. So I decided to leave on good terms. I had a great relationship with, my chain of command. I was not leaving negative, nothing like that. It was all positive. It was just time for me to do something different. It was time for me to move on. And when I signed my military contract, I agreed to 20 years and I fulfilled that and then some. So I ended up doing completely 21 years, literally on the day that I started the Canadian Armed Forces, September 17th. September 17th, I retired from the Canadian Armed Forces. So it was literally 21 days, or excuse me, 21 years to the day. So the transition, nobody saw COVID coming, didn't know that was going to be a thing. I went from being on the road a lot, a very high tempo. My family didn't see me a lot for basically the first 10 years of my relationship with my current wife and little girl. I was away a lot. Then I went from being away a lot to being home every single day. So that caused friction, as you can imagine, right? So I was trying to
Yeah.
homeschool an 11-year-old at that time, trying to homeschool. I don't know anything about the current educational curriculum. Now that's on me. I need to make myself smarter. But what I found was I was trying to teach her stuff that I felt were life lessons. So I was teaching her how to, change the tire. I was teaching her how to use power tools. I was teaching her about, medical life skills. I wasn't teaching her anything that had to do with the educational curriculum because for me to try to do that, and I did try, it was very frictionless between me and my daughter. Like, I don't know the first thing about modern day math. So who am I to try to, help my daughter with homeschooling when it's outside my realm of understanding? So there were some frictions with that. So to answer your question in a long-winded way, transition was a challenge, but I'm glad I went through it because I believe without those circumstances of friction, without those challenges, life gets a little too easy sometimes. And I'm grateful for the challenge. I'm glad it's in the rearview mirror. Don't get me wrong, but I believe it's helped me with the character that I am today.
Mhm. So I've been, following your YouTube channel for some time, and I think your YouTube channel, Direct Action, kind of shows what you do at the company, and you seem to be like really passionate about the company's mission. And I think I saw, I think one of your videos where, like, I think you were on top of somebody, and you were like just kind of providing some sort of instructions with regards to self-defense. So how did just I think you already like basically answered this question, but how did you start Direct Action? And it seems to be a very successful venture right now. And like how did you go about like getting some of the permits? Like I think you do firing instruction and like Canada has some pretty tough gun laws. So like how did this begin?
Yeah, that's a great question.
Yeah.
So you're right. There are some strict gun laws in Canada for sure. In order for me to do what I'm doing, I applied for a business firearms license. So business firearms license was granted at the beginning. I purchased specific firearms with the intent to provide not just for military and law enforcement, but I also wanted to add a junction for general public and civilians who are interested in this type of training. So at the beginning, before specific firearms landed on a prohibited list, it was great because I was doing a lot of stuff for military law enforcement and general public. Over the last year and a half, things have shifted a little bit. I'm still providing for the general public, but with more restrictions. So it's a little bit tighter in terms of what we can and cannot train on and how we go about that training, but it still happens. Primarily, I would say the last year and a half, I would say 60% of what I do is providing for law enforcement. And that's, interior combat, CQB, tactical firearms training, and defensive tactics. Essentially, those three branches are the bread and butter of what direct action offers, primarily for law enforcement. And then I would say 20% to specific organizations of the Canadian Armed Forces I've been providing contracts for. And then the last 20% of the business involvement has been for the general public. And I would do more of it with the general public and civilians because I do feel like in Canada, maybe unbeknownst or unknown to many, there is a huge gun culture in Canada, huge, but we tend to be quiet. And the folks that reach out to me for training, obviously I want to be careful with who I'm providing this training for. So oftentimes we'll, have a conversation either with a video like we're doing right now or a phone call, and I get to know these guys before we connect and actually go through some firearms training. And what I realize is there's a lot of good Canadians that just want good training. And rather than having to travel to the States, for example, which obviously increases the overall cost, they're thrilled that there's somebody here in Canada providing this. Now, I think it's just a matter of time before other guys like me come to the surface, which is fine. I have no problem with that. But what makes me a little bit different than some other people in the industry is the three main elements that I put a lot of emphasis in and that I'm passionate about is a full spectrum approach to combat, to fighting. So whether we're fighting with a gun in our hand or a knife in our hand or barehanded, if we're trying to control a situation, that's the heat and light of how to blend those three elements together. So defensive tactics or combatives, the use of the hands, and then the tactics and the technical aspect of tactical firearms training in a dynamic scenario, which would be in an internal combat situation. So blending those three elements together, that's essentially what I do in a nutshell.
Okay. Okay. So I just have like three final questions for you. So like what were like some of the most rewarding experiences you had when you were as a part of the JTF2, like which you still cherish to this day? So
Yeah, cherished moments from JTF2. I would say probably the most cherished overall experience for me is I had an opportunity to work within the unit. There's different squadrons that are responsible for different things depending on what the operational requirement is. And during my time when I started in 2004, and then when I retired, excuse me, in 2019, I had an opportunity to work with. I started my career in two squadron, then I moved to three squadron, and then I went to training squadron, went to one squadron, and I finished in training squadron. So that is one of my most cherished moments of overall because I had an opportunity to work with all of the different squadrons and different guys within each squadron. There are subtle cultural differences within each squadron. So even though they're all part of the same unit, there are certain nuances that some squadrons do a little bit differently than other squadrons. And it's not right or wrong. It's just different based on the fact that you're working with the same group of guys in and out every single day with different responsibilities. So naturally, there are certain cultural differences. So one of my most cherished overall experiences is the fact that I had an opportunity to work in a variety of different squadrons before retiring.
okay. And like what kind of advice would you like to give to, young people who are, interested in I mean, primarily to begin, join the Canadian Army, but even if they want to, let's say, join the Special Operations Forces of Canada, like, what sort of advice would you like to give them?
Great, great. That's a great question. I would say for a young member of our society that's interested in providing their services to the Canadian Armed Forces, I would say think about what it is that you would like to do. And when you sit down with a recruiter, be honest, but also be transparent. That way we don't get guided towards a trade that we're maybe not that interested in. So be firm and convicted with what it is that you want to do. Do some research, ask questions. There's guys like me that are available to bounce questions and bounce ideas off of. Seek that advice, seek that mentorship before you actually sign the dotted line. And then for folks that are interested in JTF2 or CSOR or CGI or some element of special forces or maybe something else like SARTech, for example, search and rescue technician. There are a multitude of different trades that are available in the Canadian Armed Forces. So when somebody that's just starting out, find a trade within the Canadian Armed Forces that you think you'd be interested in. And then from there, build some skills and understanding and experience of the overall Canadian Armed Forces construct before actually trying out for that thing. Now, I'm not saying spend 6-7 years, no, but a year or two to understand how the Canadian Armed Forces functions, who's who in the zoo, and then put your hat into or put your name into the hat of interest. Like for guys that are interested in trying out for JTF2, which is the most common question that I get, obviously because my background, that's where I came from. I tell guys, train for the hardest experience that you can imagine. So train for the most challenging thing that you can fathom and conceptually wrap your head around. And then when you think you're fit enough, train harder. That's the advice I would give, because the more physically fit you are in preparation for JTF2 selection, the more cognitively sharp we're going to be to make wise decisions. And the last piece of advice I would give to young men and women who are preparing themselves is there is a huge difference between going to the gym and working out and training. Training is what's needed to succeed through those difficult times that perseverance is required. So training means you're doing the things that you don't like doing. Training means you're getting up at 4 in the morning when most everybody else is sleeping. Training is you're still going for a run when it's a downpour or it's -20, because that's what needs to be done in order to succeed. Working out is you go to the gym, you put your earbuds in, you spend 25% of your time flipping through your phone. That's just working out. You're going through the motions. So there are people who have literally told me, yeah, I'm training really hard. And I ask them what they're doing. I ask them to provide me with a log and I look at it and they're doing the things that they really like doing. So if they're a big, strong dude that likes to lift weights, to them, that's what they're doing. Right. So there's a difference between working out and training. We need to do the things that we're not good at yet. If there's limitations in the body, if there's any asymmetries between the left side and the right side, when we're training, we're trying to make ourselves bulletproof in terms of limiting the chances of injury and performing optimally when we're tired, when we're at a caloric deficit, when we haven't slept in maybe 20 hours. Right. So that's the difference between training and working out. That's the advice that I would give to young men and women who are serious about advancing to the special operations.
Okay. Yeah, thank you so much, Randy, for coming on my podcast. You took a lot of time answering my questions, and you have a very busy schedule. I've been chasing you for like quite some time, and you were finally able to make this happen. So I'll just spend just like a few days editing it. I'll just be putting like a few images of you in the video, and then after that, it'll be up and running on the channel. So yeah, thank you so much for coming. So,
Amazing. Thank you very much for having me. And I look forward to chatting again in the future.
sure, sure. Yeah, thank you so much. Yeah.
Bye.
Right, bye. All right. So I hope all of you guys, I hope all the viewers, I hope all of you enjoyed this episode of the podcast. It was, I was chasing Randy for quite some time, and he finally, at the last minute, he just sent me a text and he said, he's good to go. So we recorded it, and stay tuned for part two. Somewhere down along the road, we'll be recording another episode with him once we get some more time, and we'll hopefully have an even more in-depth conversation. And yeah, just once again, let me know who else you you guys might want to have on the show. And if any of you have any sort of like feedback or comments or suggestions on how I can improve the podcast, please do let me know in the comments section below. And yeah, I hope you guys enjoy the rest of your day, and see you in the next one.